Welcome back to another episode of Supercoach, mates. Round 7 is past us and it's well and truly into upgrade season. So we're going to discuss some head-to-head options and what we think is the best of the best and the rest of the rest and where we should be spending our money. So first off, we'll look at these two defenders in James Sicily and Luke Ryan. Which of these two takes your fancy, Thomas? Because they've both been scoring well as of late. In particular Ryan, but Sicily's more proven. So, is there one of these two you'd pick at this stage?
Yeah, I'm in the exact situation right now with regards to trades, with whom to bring in. We had this conversation off air. Ryan's had a pretty good start to the season. Hasn't got under 100, I think. I'm pretty sure. Playing that goalkeeper role down back, which really suits him to a T. Not necessarily for Freya's defence per se, but for Supercoach wise, it's been excellent. Super consistent, and I guess he's the one that everyone missed out on. I think he's about 40k above his starting price, which is a bit concerning now. He's almost hitting 600k, whether it is too expensive to hop on him. He's got the runs on board. I think these two teams face off against each other on the weekend anyway, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes. The only doubt I've had, and I've mentioned this in the Patreon write-ups in the past, it's the problem is as soon as one of the tools go down, he basically steps in as a one-on-one key defender, which causes a bit of concern for his scoring, and it's happened before. So, at the moment, so far so good. It's been a clean bill of health for the other three defenders, but Sicily's definitely got the runs on the board. He had a bit of an issue with regards to Blake Hardwick taking most of the kickouts of late, so he's kind of lost that scoring for now, but definitely on the weekend he stepped up big time. Had that clutch goal as well, and he was up to his scoring best. And, even his shit scores were still all right, probably for the price you're paying. That was a bit disappointing, but because he's now at 540k, he's one that you probably jump on now and then benefit from the cheaper price. Like you're saving yourself 30-40k from Orion when they're scoring pretty similar on their good day. But what are your thoughts on those two?
I think it's a pretty tough decision, but for the long term, I'll probably be picking Sicily because that 30 and 40k can be the difference of getting a subpar primo and a top of the range primo. And these two, moving forward, it would be hard to you wouldn't be certain that Ryan will necessarily outscore Sicily in the future. Plus, he's a bit more injury prone, so I'd be picking Sicily purely because of the money. But if money is not a factor for you and you just want the player who you think will score the most come season end, I'd be backing Ryan.
No, that's understandable. Moving forward to two midfielders who one has bounced back, obviously, and still has had a pretty healthy score on the weekend against Port. But also Noah Anderson, who it benefited. We were obviously debating whether it was Raul or Anderson that could have benefited from Took's absence. It seems like Anderson's made the most of it. Out of these two, who would you pick and why?
I'd be going Steele. He's at a very good price. He's shown in the past to be a top 3 mid. And the main concern was with his tackle numbers because of his shoulder, but I think he had, as it says there, 11 tackles. So he seems to be back in good nick. Has a pretty good matchup this week, I believe, against North Melbourne as well. So should go really well. And so I'd be picking Steele.
Yeah, I'll be the same. I've just checked his break even. He's 126. So he's, I would say he's pretty on target to hit that. Definitely helps with throwing Marshall fully fit. That he's, pretty much back to full fitness as well. And he's, been able to get the most out of the tap work from Rowe. But it's as cheap as you're probably going to find him unless he has a stinker against North. The most impressive thing, coming back from his shoulder injury, is his tackle pressure. 11 tackles against a pretty big Port midfield. It's very impressive. Noah Anderson, he's one that I think you'd have to have a bigger sample size moving forward to see whether he's a beneficiary of Took's injury. More so the case they played the Tigers under the roof, who are pretty bad down there, and they leak midfield points. He's done it before where he's gone big. So, if he had this over 5-game sample size, it'd be a different story. But, yeah, Steele's a cheaper option anyway, and his runs on the board. But moving towards, we were going to do the rucks, but the rucks were pretty, that was my mistake. I completely forgot the slide, but the rucks are pretty redundant. I think this week it's all pretty obvious. We'll speak more about Max Gawn, I think, next week as a potential option if DPP rises as well. Who knows? We'll include the rucks next week. But moving forward to 2 key forwards who have smashed it over the weekend. Hawkins has had a pretty good couple of weeks. Went absolutely nuts against Dirk Sucher, against Essendon. Yeah, scored 8 goals. I think he scored almost 7.5. So he definitely slowed down after half time, but still managed to almost pop for 200. Colonel, I think was, I don't know the thing there, but I think it was 183, I'm pretty sure. Went berserk against West Coast. Would you pick, say, like, you've got 2 more forward spots left, you've loaded up elsewhere, and you're looking for a forward premium this week, would one of these guys be worthy to bring in ahead of someone else? Keeping in mind, obviously, Hawkins is a bit of a purple patch of late, but Kerno actually hasn't gone under 90, I'm pretty sure. I'll double check that while she had a spiel, but what are your thoughts on these two?
I think it's too early in the season to grab them personally because they're really expensive, mid 500k, and whilst they've been scoring well, Kerno literally had a game against West Coast, the shittest team in the AFL, and Geelong have faced West Coast as well. Sydney without McCartans and Essendon, who were completely undermanned. Laverde wasn't playing as well. So once the fixtures get a bit tougher for these 2 key forwards, expect the scoring to dry back up and there to be some sub 80 scores as well. So for me, I'd be avoiding both. Also, something to note is there'll be some DPP changes in round 12, and there could be some midfielders like your Walshes and Petrarcas, and also the Ruck and Gawn, who might get forward eligibility. So if you're loading up on these two, plus you've got your likes of Taranto, Rosie, Goulden, etc., potentially you've got a Cogs or a Butters, you can't fit all these players into your team. So if you're picking a Hawkins, then you're sacrificing on potentially getting a Walsh or a Petrarca. And I'd bet almost my life savings that those two will out-average Hawkins in the run home. So I'd be avoiding.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one of the two, I'd be going Kerno purely because he's less likely to get managed and seems to be a bit more consistent and runs up the ground a bit, gets a few touches that way. But yeah, key forwards, too volatile, and these two are too expensive. But if you saw the fixture a few weeks ago and decided to jump on Hawkins, well done, because he's gone up 130k, but now it's too much. You're almost point chasing. So yeah, I'd be looking elsewhere.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I mean, Hawkins is a kind of, you're picking based on fixtures. So, I think with this season it's a bit different because you had so many forward premiums to start with that was so good and made it hard. Kerno, so looking, just I'll bring up the stats quickly. He's gone under 100 once and he's hit 260s in that sample size. So he's pretty good for a key forward. Obviously, West Coast is a bit of an ugly when you're versus a dysfunctional team in general. But yeah, Kerno is probably the safer pick if you're forced to pick a forward and you want to go down that risky route. I think he's just, as Jonah said, less likely to get rested. And he's definitely more the mobile forward. So he's more likely to move high up the ground to get his disposals. And Mackay's kind of your stay-at-home forward, whereas Hawkins is the opposite. So Hawkins relies on those early goals. And he kicked 4 in the first quarter, which would have definitely spiked his scoring up higher than normal. Lastly, moving on to 2 rookies, obviously, with upgrade season in full swing. Yeah, rookies are far hard and fast to come by, unfortunately, at the moment, but 2 that were quite impressive. Alex Chincotta, who, looked very good against West Coast. I mean, half the bloody Carlton side scored almost 100. So made him more enticing, but definitely looked at home, bigger body, mature age body, playing out in defence, and was more positive to see him in the side with Sard and Doherty also in there. And Dill Williams, who myself and Jonas saw live at the Port game, he was playing in defence with Tom Jonas out. I'm not too sure whether or not if he continues playing that role with Jonas back in, but looked pretty impressive as well in 85. What are your thoughts, Jonas, on bringing either one of these rookies or both these rookies in? Obviously, it's really dependent on your upgrade cycle, but if you had to prioritise one, who would you pick and why?
I'd be picking Chincotta, who's about 90k cheaper and has played pretty well. Williams has looked good in parts, but he is a major sub-risk candidate, and that was the reason we didn't initially pick him at his base price. So if you're paying 190k for a guy who could easily get subbed and then score a 40 or get dropped after one poor performance, I think that's too risky for my liking. So I think, unfortunately, the ship has sailed on that one. He's had 2 price rises. So whilst he's looked good, he's still in a strong Port Adelaide team towards the bottom of that team. So very much on edge. Whereas Chincotta, even if he gets dropped in a few weeks, he'll have guaranteed made himself about 100k with some of his scoring. And you don't have to commit as much money to him. So yeah, I'd be looking at Chincotta. And if you're looking at doing a double downgrade, there aren't too many rookies on the horizon, so I could see why people would look at Williams, for instance. But I would rather go for, say, a Ryan Anglin at 124k or a Sam Simpson, perhaps, because at least that way you're saving yourself a bit of money in the meantime.
Yeah, I mean, Williams, the issue with him is his job security. I think it's a little bit questionable. Port's rookies don't tend to have a good long run at it, but I think Chincotta is one that I think the Blues want to keep playing, in my opinion anyway, with the way he's going. He looks pretty aggressive at it. He pushes high up the ground as well, which is handy for them. But that's all for our versus series. We're moving on to overrated, underrated. But a couple quick ones before we wrap it up. This question, obviously, with with money being an issue with a lot of players. What are your thoughts on bringing in? Obviously, we discussed still a little bit, but Gorney is one that's interesting considering he's down, almost down at 5. I think he's 500, just above 500k now. What are your thoughts on obviously bringing in players who are well-known premiums like these two and have dropped significantly because of injury? Bringing in now to save money, or kind of waiting a couple of weeks to see how they perform when fully fit? What are your thoughts on that? Is that an overrated or underrated statement?
I reckon I'd be more on the side of waiting, because both these guys still have a bit of a high break even, and in Gorn's case in particular, he's rock only. So who are you trading? Yeah. You're only bringing him in if you don't have an R2 at the moment for some reason. You got like Radigaleo or something, because you're not trading Marshall after his good performance for once. You're not trading, for instance, an English or a Darcy. Perhaps you can go Grundy, get down to Gorn. That's maybe, but otherwise I wouldn't be looking at that, because if you look at Gorn's fixture, he's got Gold Coast, tough matchup. Then Reeves, who nullified English quite well. I guess Port Adelaide's a pretty favourable matchup. And then Sean Darcy, and then he plays Carlton's Rock, not that good. And I think by the time he plays Collingwood around 13, Cameron's back. So not the most amazing run for him. So I'd rather wait and see if he gets forward status before jumping on. I'm not going to trade English or Marshall, but if you got Grundy and you need 80k, you don't know where to get it from, maybe an option. Hope he goes ballistic, but I don't see him going ballistic against some of the Brockman he comes up against. Whereas Steele, I prefer, because you're not sacrificing necessarily a premium to get him in, like a Grundy. And he's got a better run, but he could easily break down again. And really hurt you. So with a 126 break even if he scores 160, he's only going up like 20k. And then that is the real deal, that he's pretty much all over and past his injury concerns, and then you can jump on. So yeah, I'd be more on the side of waiting.
Yeah, that's understandable. I would say more. I think it just depends on where you're ranked and what you're looking at, what you think. But I think in this season in particular, I think you just got to bite the bullet and go for it. I think, yeah, I'm a little bit different to Jonas with regards to the fact that I'm in a situation as well where I need these players to perform to get the quick cash. But I think in general, when you've got your top line premium is not moving much in money, I think you need to find value somewhere, and these are two perfect examples where they're fully capable of scoring massive. And I think if you want to take that risk and are willing to pay the consequence if it fails a little bit, and you have an option or a fallback option, it might be time to bite the bullet immediately. But it's dependent on team structure and all that. But moving on to an interesting one, obviously Sheezel got his DPP last set. But what are your thoughts on bringing in players that may not necessarily you pick if they're solely in one position, i.e. Petrarca, but say he gets forward status or whoever gets a different status? What are your thoughts on bringing them early to kind of, go ahead of the crowd and get ahead of it early, so you utilize, you get their points on field and whatnot, but you're also able to make that switch basically a week earlier? What are your thoughts on that? Is it an overrated or underrated statement?
I think it's overrated because you should also take into consideration what their price is going to be. So, for instance, with Petrarca, he's an enticing option because of his fixture. There's the added bonus that he could get forward status. But the fact is, if he gets forward status with the fixture that he's got, in theory, he should be 50k more expensive. And then you have to bring him in at a 50k price point. But if he's playing against tough opposition, there's no rush to get him in because his price should remain similar to what it is now. And then you just bring him in without the risk of being stuck with him as a mid only. So I think it's more fixture related, like a combination of fixture and then likelihood of getting DPP. So that's why I think it's a bit overrated.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think
this case though, there's a 60% chance he gets it or something like that. So it's like, do you want to get him in immediately when he comes forward eligible, if he does become forward eligible? And in that case, then you probably bring him in now because he'll be more expensive with his run.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. I think there's too much risk with regards to the potential of him or whoever the player is not getting the status. I think you should be a bit careful there in picking it. But by all means, I mean, we're using Petrarca as an example. He's one that could absolutely explode the next couple of weeks with an easy run. And he'd almost be too expensive to pick thereafter. So, but in general, I think it doesn't really matter. Most of the popular players are owned high enough, but I think you can always easily just pick them up at a similar price, even if they get DPP, and you can utilise that on that week. But the final one we got to finish off with a bit of fun, obviously it's a big issue in the AFL this week with the whole Jade Stevenson issue, with the photo on the left there with the double 50 for dissent. What are your thoughts, Jonas, on obviously from an AFL perspective, with 4 umpires on field, there's more eyes on the game, but what are your thoughts on this whole dissent rule in general? It was brought in of recent, but what are your thoughts on how it's been adjudicated in general, and it's whether something that is to be kept moving forward or to be changed entirely based on what the results are so far? Is that an overrated or underrated statement?
I think it's rules like this are just complicated and inconsistent, and for that reason, like for instance, Cogs getting pinged for putting up his hands. I've seen so many other players with outstretched arms not get pinged. So that sort of inconsistency is what I hate. So I'd be getting rid of the rule and maybe replacing it with like a more easily a rule which is more easily adjudicated. Like, for instance, verbal abuse. They swear if they say something that's like provocative or insulting, which you can lay that down in writing, then that can be dissent. But the whole open of the arms, which isn't really that like it doesn't it's not I wouldn't classify it as proper dissent, and it's almost an instinctual action. I think that's a bit overboard, but yeah, there's not much we can do about it now. Hopefully they change it sometime soon, but I don't see that happening. I think they just try and really like stamp any form of dissent out, which won't happen because we're humans. We're naturally going to be instinctive if we disagree with a call. Like, for instance, on Sunday, there were a couple calls in the last quarter of the Collingwood game where some Collingwood players like looked at the umpire and had their arms out, going, "Are you serious?" In theory, is that meant to be another 50 meters? Like, that's where it's like, where do you draw the line? So, I think keep it to a point where it's easily able to. It's black and white, not this inconsistent stuff. Make it easy for the umpires to be able to follow, not go at their own whim. What do you think, though?
Nah, yeah, 100% agree. I remember that when this whole dissent rule came into place, it was ironic when it was a St Kilda bloke that got pinned for it, but I remember it pretty clearly. It was Dan McKenzie. I don't know what the free kick against was, but he literally put the ball down, and it was in a quote-unquote demonstrative manner, and he got pinned for 50 metres. So, yeah, it's a frustrating rule. Having played myself, I understand, abuse is no right to say it to an umpire, but if you can't argue your case when it's a questionable decision, then I don't know, it's a bit ridiculous in my opinion. It just means that there's less onus on the umpires, because I think if you are umpiring, I mean, I'm not speaking for umpires, but in just my opinion, if you were umpiring a game and you knew that you could give dissent when you felt like it, essentially, if you felt it was a demonstrative action, then, you can think that the decision that I make, I'm protected by that action to pin the bloke for 50. I mean, we're looking at the picture on the left there, which kind of blew up on social media over the weekend, with Ray Chamberlain giving Jaden Stevenson the double 50, which was a little bit ridiculous. But give a bit of context, I think he went in for a tackle, got the bloke high because he ducked into it. And Stevenson you could see his lips basically saying, "What else am I meant to do?" And he got pinned for 50 there. And then he got another 50 for basically running past Ray and then mimicking the action of the player. So what are you meant to do there? Like you're basically, bandage up your mouth a little bit with regard to what you can say to the umpire. And I understand if you swear at them, by all means, go for it. 50 metres is fair enough. But the whole definition of dissent is to, you're basically abusing the umpire at some point. But if you can't argue your case, then what's the point of making it? Umpires can feel free to make as many controversial decisions they like, well knowing that the player can't talk back. So, yeah, and I think it just gives them unnecessary power. And I think I heard this on the Saints TV podcast, I think of recent, did this week's podcast when they were talking about the Port game. One of the blokes, Joyce, on that podcast mentioned that having the 4 umpires there means there's a fair few new umpires on board. So whether or not it's a thing where there's inexperienced umpires having to make calls and not too confident wins is a whole other kettle of fish. But I think with this whole rule, there needs to be some sort of change on the off season. I probably don't think it'll happen during the season, but off season needs to be changed, or just a clearer definition of what dissent means. Because if the players are kind of barricaded from able to actually ask or question the umpire to some degree, then you're in a pretty shit place with regards to umpiring, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's all we got time for today. I know it's a bit of a short one. We kept it nice and brief. Unfortunately, Nathan away, his special little segment will be kept for next week, and he can double up then. But until then, I think we're both myself and Jonas are pretty busy this week with other commitments. I know Nathan's been smashed with work as well. So the Patreon write-up's going to be a little bit different. I know we've been a bit on delay with that and apologise for that. But we're going to do it in a little bit different format just for this week in more of a dot point setup just because of how busy all three of us have been. But until then, good luck with your teams this week and we'll catch you next week.